Can you guys all introduce yourselves? Do you have some hot mics that you can pass around? Should have a button on it.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello.
Everybody, a warm round of applause for our guests.
Hello, welcome. Thank you all for coming. I'll go to the next slide because it says who we are. So I'll start with that. The four of us are here today from Valve. We work on various things. We'll go through and introduce ourselves. We're going to run through a couple of things, just kind of an overview of Steam, some trends we've been seeing, some kind of just general platform information, a number of tips and best practices and things like that. These are often questions that we get from developers or simply things that we wished more developers knew existed as functions on Steam or things that you could take advantage of to get the most out of releasing your game on Steam. A couple of things that we've recently added to Steam and things that we're working on. And then afterwards, we'll do some just kind of open question and answer with you as a group. And also then there's a happy hour downstairs afterwards where we can chat one-on-one and get to know each other and tell us about your games, ask us questions, things like that. So we'll go down the row here and introduce ourselves.
Hi, I'm Ben Burbank. I've recently joined Valve as part of the Campo Santo team. We're making a game called In the Valley of Gods in Valve. But I'm also helping out a little bit on Steam stuff, so there we go.
You have fans.
I have friends. I'll cheer for you.
I'm Molly Carroll. Thanks. I work on the Steam business team. I mostly work with partners and set up events kind of like this one, although I didn't do this one, to sort of talk to developers about Steam. And I work a lot with Alden and... Oh no, sorry, I spoiled his name.
My name's Alden. I've been at Valve now 13 years, and I've worked on games, and thank you. I now spend most of my time working on Steam. My background is in design, so I work on design, and as you can see, I can get line spacing horribly wrong, even. I also work on the business side. Anyways, I spend a lot of my time thinking about the design of various portions of Steam, the store, the back end, the community, all of that, how it all works together, how it helps you as developers connect with your customers, coming up with new features, helping think through those features, designing them, how they look, how they work, all of that. So in particular, I like coming and doing these kinds of talks and especially the question and answer and the mingling afterwards because it gives me an opportunity to learn directly from developers, what should we be working on next? What things don't work well for you? What things would you like Steam to do better for you? Things like that.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jane. Hi. I also recently joined Valve along with the other Campo Santo folks with Ben. So spent about 5 months there now. And I normally work, most of my time I spend working on games. But I also, in true Valve fashion, you can also do whatever you want. And I'm really interested in helping folks, other developers and whatnot, get to know Steam, because we've been using Steam as an external partner not too long ago, so we feel like we have a lot of perspective to, help Steam be better at, working with partners and stuff. So anyway, that's why I'm here, to get to talk to all of you.
All right, we're gonna start a little bit just because I think it's useful to talk about who we are as a company, how Valve works, how big we are, who we are, how we're organized. It feeds a lot into how we make decisions and how we prioritize work. So I'm going to actually give that to Jane to talk a little bit about.
So, okay, I'm going to talk a bit about Valve, even though I've only been there 5 months. So let's see. So one of the things I, thought as I first joined was that, a lot of folks actually outside of Valve don't really know anything about Valve, and they just see Valve as some sort of place full of robots. So it helps to talk a little bit about, who are the folks at Valve. For example, there's about 360 employees, all based in Bellevue, Washington, so it's just east of Seattle. And Valve does a lot of stuff, and it's easy to forget that other than Steam, we work on a lot of games. We have at least 5 games that we work on. We also work on hardware stuff, like the VR Knuckles thing that we're working on and other things. yeah, so there are lots going on. And there's no formal hierarchy. So the first day you join, we're all on the same level. There's no bosses, which is very interesting. Everyone sort of finds whatever interests them as what's on your plate is what you determine as what's most interesting and what you think bring the most value to you and other folks. So we're all very self-directed, and I would say we're very customer-focused because, we're a privately held company. We don't have shareholders. We don't really have VC boards or funders who really look at sort of our bottom line or anything. So a lot of our decisions really, genuinely actually say this. I'm not, drinking the Kool-Aid or anything. We try to do the right thing to see if these are things that will make our customer happier, and then we try to do it, not because it makes the most money or anything.
Actually, I just wanted to jump in a minute. The second bullet point here about being self-directed, I think is useful in just explaining why we're here today is not because somebody told us to come here and talk to game developers. We're here because we think it's important to interface directly with game developers, hear directly from you what your concerns, what your feedback, what your questions are, which helps us go back and make better decisions about how we build out Steam, how we think about product development, all of that stuff.
Yeah, so another thing I really noticed when I first joined Valve is that I had no idea Valve was hiring, but actually Valve is hiring all the time. We hire people with a proven track record of shipping products. We usually hire somewhat more senior folks, but that's not a requirement or anything. We hire a lot of folks who can just figure out what best they work on. So I personally feel like a lot of folks who've had an indie background really will actually work well at Valve because you're used to no one telling you what you should be doing. You make your decisions for yourself. And again, we're always hiring. We don't really hire full roles, so it seems strange sometimes to look at the jobs at Valve and it kind of lists everything, and you think that maybe you're just not updating, but actually we do just want to look for good people all the time. So if you're interested to know more, then you can feel free to talk to us at the happy hour afterwards. But now we'll talk about other things about Steam.
Thanks, Jane. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Steam and just kind of some general overview of how we see the platform doing. Just some numbers, not just because I like talking about big numbers, but big numbers are pretty cool. But it's really about kind of context and helping you understand what the opportunity looks like for releasing your game on Steam and connecting with customers. As of last month, we were up to 90 million monthly active users. So those are users coming back and engaging with Steam, launching Steam, playing games, things like that. We continue to also get new purchasing users per month. And so what we're seeing is a trend of about 1.6 million new customers making a purchase for the first time. So we're not just a bunch of existing customers coming back and re-engaging, but actually acquiring new customers that are coming and buying new products for the first time and becoming part of Steam. If we look at kind of how people are engaging over time, we've definitely seen a lot of growth in the number of concurrent users, and you can see there's kind of a peak there in mid 2018 and kind of a going back down, and really what that is a lot of that has to do with PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. What we're seeing is a little bit of a correction back to the general trend line of of Steam concurrent users, back to, I guess, undoing that weird anomaly of that one particular game, back to probably a continuation of the trend line that we were seeing in growth prior to that. We think of Steam, well, Steam is a worldwide global platform, and this is really important for us and we think for game developers as well, being able to reach customers wherever they are in the language that they're in, paying with money that they recognize, with payment methods that they're comfortable paying with. This is a really big part of how we help connect game developers with the whole world. A lot of the world doesn't actually have credit cards or even PayPal, and they pay with a lot of interesting, weird, different ways. If you're a customer in Russia, nobody has credit cards because they're all stolen there, so people go to physical kiosks and feed cash into the kiosk to load their digital wallets. And so we've done the work to integrate with that as an example. So there's 90 different payment methods like that that we've done work to integrate with, which means when you put your game up for sale, it's immediately available to customers regardless of all of those different kinds of payment methods. And then we also put a lot of work into content servers and making sure that once a customer has purchased your game that they can download it really quickly and get up and running in that game as fast as they can. So content servers is about pushing your game content out around the world to make sure that it's close to the customer wherever they are. Looking a little bit about how Steam is broken down by region. This graph is a little bit weird in that you can see that it's not in order of size. It used to be when Western Europe was our second largest market, and it has since been passed by Asia as the second largest market of customers on Steam. A lot of growth in China and Korea and Japan driving that. So some tips, best practices, things like that. One of the biggest things, just looking at sales breakdown by region, one of the most important things to be thinking about as you're going to release your game, and actually well ahead of that, while you're planning about how you're going to reach customers around the world, localization matters and is really important. It's important for a couple of different reasons. One is you want to make sure that customers can understand your game and engage with it in the way that they're able to understand it. And two is that the Steam store actually filters, it will actually recommend games for players based on the language that that game is available in. So we found out a long time ago that players in Japan didn't like being recommended English-only games that they couldn't understand. So if you don't translate into particular languages, then your game is not going to be surfaced very well to customers that speak those languages. The little table here of growth in regions, we ran an analysis of games that added localization after release, and the relative growth in regions that primarily speak those languages. So there's kind of an obvious that English is pretty important. A huge part of the world speaks not only English as a first language, but a lot of the world will also speak it as a second language. The other ones in there reflect a trend of especially East Asian countries where customers are much less likely to speak a second language. And so you really, what we find in general is it's really hard to get any traction in Korea or Japan or China unless you actually translate into those languages, because most of them don't also speak English. Whereas if you're thinking about the German market, for example, a lot of Germans also speak English, so it's maybe less impactful to actually translate into German. So if this is an area in particular, and Ben has been spending a bunch of time thinking about this, of how do we also help you get more specific data about based on the kind of game that you're making, where your customer is likely to be, and what language is going to be more important to translate into. As an obvious example, if you're making a simulation game, it probably is worth translating into German, because that's where your customers are going to be. But if you're making a visual novel or a certain kind of role-playing game, it's more likely that Japanese might be the key region and language that's important for your game. So we're working on a set of tools that where you can help, where we can help you better understand what languages and regions are going to be most impactful for your particular kind of game. Another feature that has been kind of long overlooked or people haven't really thought much about is controller support in games. This has changed a lot over the last couple of years, I think because a lot of the big game engines now support controller integration pretty well. But there are a couple things to think about as you're working on your game and thinking about how players are going to interact with it. There are a lot of players on Steam that have a controller. There's over 30 million Steam accounts that have one or more Steam controllers that they've used to play a game session. 20% of those have connected more than one controller and sometimes multiple controllers. This includes all kinds of different controllers, Xbox controllers, PlayStation, dance pads, whatever. So we can detect, on Steam's part, we can detect hundreds of different kinds of controller models. And we have an API that can help you support all of those with one integration. A lot of game engines have relatively good controller support out of the box for Xbox controllers. But for PlayStation controllers, for example, of which there are a lot, 27% of all all controllers used to play a game on Steam are PlayStation controllers. There's very few good resources for good PlayStation controller support. And the Steam Input API actually handles that really well and can even show the right UI elements to the user based on the kind of controller that they have plugged in. So if you're working on release of your game and you're thinking about controller support, I strongly encourage you to just search for controller in the Steamworks documentation and take a look through that. Our API, you can just write one integration and support hundreds of different kinds of controllers, even if somebody decides to plug a dance pad in and try to play your game. If it's been a year or more since you've last released a game on Steam, it's worth just being aware that there is a brief review period prior to release. The idea here is not to have a rigorous certification process. The idea is we want to be able to take a look at the game, make sure that it's configured correctly. We know that Steamworks is complicated. There's a lot of tools there. It is can be cumbersome to get everything dialed in and set up correctly. And so the review process is really to make sure that when you hit the release button to release your game, that customers are going to be able to play it and it's going to be a good experience for them out of the gate. So there's a couple of quick release periods or review periods where we take a look at your store page, we take a look at your game build, we run through the game build, make sure that it's, if you indicated that it's supposed to launch on Linux, we make sure that it's actually going to launch and play on Linux, things like that. So build in, I would say, a week for that, just in case we encounter some issue that you need to go back and address. You can always do it early and continue to update your game after that process. It's just a one-time thing. A lot of people recently have been talking about wish lists and trying to speculate, like, do they matter? How much do they matter? How many wish lists do I need? The answer is wish lists do matter if the people that have your game on their wish list are actually interested customers that are going to buy your game. We're very careful not to actually just look at the number of people and use that when making decisions. We know that that's actually a number that can be manipulated by hiring a bunch of bots. So it doesn't actually affect the algorithm. It actually affects who's going to get communicated to about your game when you hit the release button. So if you have 10,000 people with your game on their wish list, when you hit the release button, they will all get an email that says, your game is now out, a game that they've had on their wish list. So it's really important for building up audience prior to release and making sure that they all get notified when your game is released. It also can be a nice reflection of whether you are doing activities prior to release that are helping you build awareness and familiarity with your product. So if you're coming up on release day and you have 56 people with the game on your wish list, it probably means when you hit the release button, there's a lot of people that are going to be hearing about your game for the very first time, which is probably a huge missed opportunity to build awareness and familiarity of your game. If release day is the first time people have heard about your game, it's going to take a while to actually convince them that your game is the right thing for them. A little bit about how Steam works. By design, we don't sell ads. We design our store to be personalized for each customer based on what they're playing, what their friends play, who they follow, the developers of games that they've played. This is all very personalized for each user, and this allows us to be much more flexible in the kinds of diverse content that we can support on the platform and help connect with audiences. We think this is really important because we want to be able to support a big, broad range of kinds of content on Steam. And so there's a couple of important bits, which I'll get to in the next couple of slides, that you should pay attention to as you're getting ready to release your game. How these recommendations work, they change over time. We're always testing new ways of generating recommendations to try to make sure that customers are getting the games that they're likely to be most interested in. So that changes all the time. There are still a few curated spots, which people always have questions about. For that to work, since we show it to such huge portions of the population, we have to be very confident that those are relevant to large portions of the population. We're always hesitant to show something to a lot of people unless we're really confident that it's actually going to be relevant to them, because we know that if we keep showing irrelevant products to people, they'll start to tune out either the whole store or parts of the store or things like that. So we're very careful with that, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how to generate recommendations and personalize the store for players. So one of the things that you can do as a game developer, and I hope you can see this pretty well. Yeah, okay. You as a developer can modify the tags on your own game, and I encourage you to do so. You should go in, tag the tags that apply to your game. That is currently how most of our recommendations are generated. We look at relevance of tags from one game to the next and use that to draw correlations. So if somebody plays games that are tagged similar to your game, then we're more likely to recommend your game to those players. It tends to look more heavily at the narrow tags that are applied. So action is not really a descriptive tag. Doesn't really, like, it applies to half the catalog on Steam at this point, as does indie, I suppose. So those are less weighted when we're deciding those similar products, but things like Story Rich or Walking Simulator are more narrow tags, so those will be stronger indicator that your game is similar to another game. By and large, you don't have to worry about the order that these are tagged on your store page. You just want to make sure that the relevant tags that are appropriate for your game are tagged on there. And inversely, you can remove tags from your page. So as Jane and Ben went through on Firewatch, a bunch of players thought, this looks like a survival game. Let's tag the survival. It's totally not a survival game. So you can go in and remove that so that people aren't disappointed when they get into a game that is not what they thought it was. Also, because Steam is personalized and your game may show up to some different subsets of users, it may not even show up to you as a developer, probably because you already own the game, so we're not going to recommend it again to you. It can be hard for you as a developer to tell, well, is anybody seeing my game? So we built out an entire dashboard to show where your game is showing up in Steam. What spots, whether it's on the home page, on tag pages, on different browsing pages. So this is a page that you can go to for your game and see just where is my game showing up and to how many customers and how are people engaging with it. There's also a new aspect of this that we just rolled out last week, I believe, that also showcases where your game is showing up in the community and to how many people is your game showing up in those little toasts that pop up in the corner that say, so-and-so is now playing Half-Life, or Molly is now playing Dota. So it would be basically impressions of your game to friends of people that are playing your game. We also added a CSV export if you really want to download this stuff and noodle with it a lot. Another feature that will be more relevant after release is thinking about how you can present new events and content in your game to customers. We have a way where you can temporarily change all of your branding assets for your game for a period of time, and then you can set it for a specific period of time so you don't have it saying new for the next 6 months and forget to go back and update that. So this can be useful where you have your artwork override with some cool new things on there, either describing the new update or some new content or something that's happening. Maybe it's the Halloween event is happening. And then when you also time that with putting your game on sale, it means when people who have your game on your wish list get that wish list email reminder, it will have this updated artwork that says, not only is it on sale, but there's something cool happening in it. There's some event, there's some update, all of that. So I encourage you to take a look at that and think about how to time that with the updates or events or interesting things that you're doing in your game. And lastly, yes, contact us. There is a form, there's a button in the Steamworks website that says Contact Steam Publishing. we just learned a couple days ago from other conversations with indie developers that many people think this might be just a black hole that communication goes into. It is, in fact, not, but we'll work on making that more clear. This is really useful if you have urgent support that you need with your game. Please use this button because it is actually routed to somebody that is available and has the right expertise to answer that question. We're also happy to give you our email addresses, and you can email any of us with questions. We're sometimes out of town like we are right now, in which case I'm not answering emails that are coming into me very often. So that's useful for kind of long-term strategic or advice questions, but if you have urgent issues that you need help with, using the contact form is a great way to actually get a hold of us and get help. All right, so I'll go through a few recent additions to Steam and stuff that we're working on, and then we'll do some questions. Steam broadcasting is a thing that we are spending a bunch of time working on and thinking about. Right now, you as a developer can live stream directly on your store page. This is a really great way to put representation of your game in front of players, show them what it's really like to play the game. Either you can do this yourself, you can host somebody else's stream if you have a personality or even just somebody in your community that is really good at showing off your game. The developers that we've seen do this really well, they often do it during a sale or some other event where they're going to have a bunch of new players coming in for the first time and curious and checking out their game, and it's a really great opportunity to show just what is it like to play the game. And not only that, but what is it like to play the game from somebody that is actually really good at it and can show it off in its best form. You can also use it as a way as a developer to engage with your audience and chat with them and answer questions and actually answer questions, engage with them, talk with them, gather feedback. This also has the added benefit if you're running the live stream on your store page, then it can also cause your game to show up on the home page of Steam in some new spaces. So it's another good way to help attract more audience and drive traffic to your store page at a time when there's something interesting for players to engage with in particular. I mentioned stat reporting. I guess now I have a whole nother slide on it. So this is a little picture of the little toast that pops up in the corner. So this is the reporting on and it's not only just reporting on how many people saw that little toast of your game, but how many people already owned your game that saw that versus how many people don't own your game and saw that. So, we know that social proof and social validation is one of the biggest reasons that people pick up games. People like to play games because their friends are playing them. You can look at any of the big popular games out there, and it's obviously like there are better games than some of them, but people are playing certain games because their friends are playing them. And the 16th time that I saw Ben playing Firewatch, I finally had to go play it. So anyways, the data is not currently in a very good form, but it is presented there. You can look at it. Our first step was to start collecting that data and exposing it. The next step is we're going to make it actually presented in a usable and a better understandable format. So that's a work in progress. A while back, we released developer homepages, so you as a developer can set up your presence, your brand within Steam and have players be able to follow you, either as an individual or as a company. And the real benefit there is, well, they can, even if you only have one product, it's useful to start building your brand. You'll probably work on a second product. And when you do so, when you hit the release button, the people that are following you as a company or individual will get an email that says, hey, a game by somebody you follow is now available. So it's another way for people to be able to follow you and become a fan of you as a developer and not just a fan of a single game. And if you have already multiple products, it's a great way to organize and catalog and show off all the different games that you have and be able to drive players to be able to find the other things that you make. There's been a couple of recent updates to forum moderation, some additional tools for you as developers and some services that we're providing now automatically. Any reported post in Steam, whether it's in your game or in our general discussions, our moderation team is looking at all those reported posts and dealing with them. So if you as a developer, you don't need to feel the need to go in and deal with reported posts in your Steamworks forums or Steam forums, and even if you don't want to deal with moderating yourself, but you see people in your own forums that are saying things or posting things that you think are inappropriate, just go ahead and flag it like a normal user would, and that'll be put in our queue to review and moderate. So you can use that as a way of just elevating things to our attention, and we'll deal with it. You can also go in and for particular posts in a thread, you can mark it as the answer. So that's a great way to recognize when somebody has answered a particular question and call attention to that. So thanks. It's useful for recognizing people that are contributing and also being able to call out when a thread or when a post in a thread has been already answered, and then people don't have to keep asking the same question or speculating. We've also been putting a lot of work into updating Steam chat, and I'm calling out here on this slide a particular way, a thing that you can take advantage of as a developer is an area called Rich Presence that you can populate with information about your game, so that when somebody's in your game and say they're in a lobby waiting to matchmake with other players, you can send that status to Steam so that their friends can see that they're waiting in a lobby, waiting for somebody to come join them. You can also use it to describe interesting things in your game, like Ben is in the middle of battling the big boss. Like, this might be a good time to come watch them in Firewatch. That was a really bad metaphor. I'll use Molly. You played Dota, right? No? Okay. So I encourage you to look at that. I will caveat that with the documentation right now is pretty terrible. We simply have some API calls that are called rich presence. So that's about the only documentation we have so far on that, but we're in the process of making that a little bit better. So one thing in particular upcoming that I think is useful to talk about, we're in the process of overhauling the events system in Steam. And so this lets any of you be able to have opportunities to re-engage with your customers, communicate with your customers when there's interesting things happening in your game. Either you're running some kind of live event, live streaming, you're making a big update, running a contest, doing a giveaway, doing an AMA or a chat, anything, any reason that you can come up with to tell your customers, now is an interesting time to come play our game. There's some interesting moment. So the idea is that this system can be flexible enough for whatever kinds of events or interesting moments that you're coming up with, and then leave it up to us to deal with how to notify players, get them to come back, all of that. So it'll come with a bunch of notification systems and probably reminder emails for players without spamming players too often with that kind of stuff. And then there's a bunch of other upcoming things. We're going to continue working on broadcast, and one of the particular things that we're going to be doing there is putting more ways for games to deliver data to the broadcast feed. If you watched the Dota International on Steam.tv, you might have noticed there's a little timeline at the bottom that actually indicated when interesting moments in the tournaments happened. And so that lets fans be able to seek back in the timeline to see, oh, when did that thing happen? When did the draft happen? So our near-term plan is to expose that API to you as game developers so that when people are live streaming your game, that data can be plumbed through and shown in that timeline or in other kinds of UI elements on the screen. We're also going to be putting some more work into group chat, especially for game developers that want to be able to use that to engage with players. Right now, like game-specific chat is a little bit buried. It's currently kind of by design because the new chat wasn't yet set up to have an enormous amount of people in it yet. So that's something that we're working on and then being able to surface that more. So if you want to have live conversations with players within Steam, giving you a place to do that, optionally, of course. We're also working on updating the Steam library. just to pull in all the interesting content that your community is making, the events that you want to be able to notify players about, all the other interesting things that are happening around your game. Again, it'll be personalized for each player, so it'll be a little bit centered around what their circle of friends are doing in that game, screenshots that their friends have taken, milestones their friends have achieved, things like that. Also, moving the new chat to mobile and updating our mobile apps as well. That's also ongoing. And then ... What else should we be doing? What other things are on the top of your mind? What other things should Steam have? What should we fix? Things like that. So I think we have a little bit more time. We'd like to use this time to if we can do it with this size group.
We definitely can.
Excellent.
I have the first question. Can I warn Jeff like right now? I saw a slide. I just want to warn Jeff so bad right now.
You want to warn?
Definitely want to warn Jeff. Yeah, if anybody has a question, just stick your hand up, and I will like literally run through the theater and give you this microphone so that you can ask the question. It'll like be recorded, and everybody will be able to hear it, and that'll be good. So, also, quick round of applause. Thank you guys so much for this amazing like look behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Uh,
And if you have questions, try to keep, if they're applicable to a broad group of people, let's do that.
Yeah, if they're
here.
really
And
particular, we have the happy hour down in the Barrel of Fun right after this, and you can just ask all these particulars. And we're gonna have some drink tickets. They're gonna be available to come down to. So, yeah, go see Nathan if you want those, but not right now. Right now, it's time for questions. So, if you have a question, stick your hand up. Gabe, are you sure? Okay, this is a real one. Okay.
So if the answer to this question is we're working on it and you can find out later, that's great. But my question is, you gave some stats about breakdown of revenue by geography and by language. And I'm wondering if that includes the super huge games like PUBG, CSGO, and Dota, and if those numbers change, if those are excluded.
Do you want to talk about data?
I mean, I can talk a little bit. So I believe this slide is a general slide. That's all revenue. Things do change when you take out some of the big games, although they change in surprising ways sometimes. So one of the tools that I'm working on building in Steam is a thing that lets you say, let's say I had like 10 games that I think are related. Essentially, like this is a genre of game that I'm creating. So I don't know, genital jousting and Hitman. And
Sick.
whatever. So, and you think that those games are related. We're in the back end, we might be able to find like a cluster of games that are actually like that, and then be able to show you data that's like in Korea, that game might be super popular right now. Games that are like this are super popular right now. So maybe consider localizing in Korean or something along those lines. I can talk more about that later if anybody wants.
I have one more question in sort of the same vein, and so maybe you already addressed this. But specifically with localization, which you gave like an increase in revenue from going from one language to another, I'm wondering, so this is like tying in language and currency. So like, for example, what percentage of yuan is spent in games that are Mandarin first as opposed to localized into simplified Chinese afterwards? Is there a way that that information would ever be exposed to developers?
I think we haven't thought about that in particular. So you're saying like developed first, either by a Chinese developer or
right. So
or
most games
natively
come out in a native language. Generally, in this room, probably we all assume English to be the default, but there are absolutely Chinese developers making games in China for a Chinese audience. And I'm wondering, like, with we see Asia has taken over Western Europe. What percentage of that revenue is sort of accessible, quote unquote, to Western developers translating their game into simplified Chinese, as opposed to more of a closed system? And forgive me for that.
So I don't have hard numbers, but I can tell you generally that we're seeing more and more game developers from China making games and releasing them on Steam. But by and large, most of the revenue that is being earned in China is actually from developers from the rest of the world selling content into a new marketplace. And so there's particular games, many developers I've talked to that say they translated into Chinese and now half of their customers are in China. Of course, they now have a new problem because they have a bunch of customers they don't understand or can't talk to. So
Yeah. I think
it's probably a good problem to have.
yeah, and some of the closed system in China is there are Chinese stores also. So I think probably some closed system stuff might be happening in those ecosystems instead, possibly. Also, I just learned a lot about the games that Koreans are into. I feel like this is like new boundaries. Hang on, let me get another question.
Just an interesting anecdote. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen the first Chinese-only language games reach the top 5 sellers on Steam, and there were 2 of them in the same week. And it was pretty amazing to see, like looking at the global top sellers, there's all these games that are in English and the usual languages, and then there's 2 games that were Chinese language only, which was pretty amazing.
Hey, great talk. I was wondering, so for me, one of the biggest problems as a user on Steam is discoverability. I know that some of the stuff you went over, like the categories, especially the the dev entered categories and things like that. I was wondering if you were developing anything else in that field or like in that area where maybe you're classifying mechanics or thinking about mechanics in a more empirical way, like where it's not quite so like genre specific or like, oh, this term caught on, so that's what I'm going to put there. And in general, like some of the ways in which other stores have solved some of these problems is through human curation. But that's not really the model that you're after for probably for good reasons. But I'm just wondering if you're working in that at all.
Yes, I mean, we're definitely working on it. So, I mean, there's a couple parts of that question to kind of take apart and deconstruct. One is kind of what's available on the platform in general, and that if you want to look at like curation as part of what even gets onto the platform, we think it's healthier for a more diverse set of products to be able to get onto the platform rather than us being a bottleneck preventing things from getting onto the platform. So then you've got another challenge of, okay, now you have a large pool of products. How do you pick the right things to put in front of any given user? And so that is a thing that we're trying to solve in a number of different ways. Some of them involve humans and some involve machines. We know that statistical recommendations by some kind of black magic box.
Skynet, you can say Skynet.
Yes, Skynet. Is only part of the picture. Putting the right statistical recommendation in front of a user is only useful if that user also understands the context under which we're recommending that game. So we could know you've played 100 games, and we could know with a really high level of accuracy that the next game that you're most likely to want to buy is this particular game. But if you don't understand why that game is relevant or interesting to you, then that recommendation is not necessarily going to actually be productive as a thing that we present to a user. So that's where other people come into play. What your friends are playing and what they recommend is actually really valuable and is actually one of the biggest drivers of how people make purchasing decisions on Steam. Also from developers that you follow, curators that you follow, things like that provide the context and the social proof about why you might be interested in a particular title. So we're working on making sure that we have ways of gathering those networks of information and presenting them as part of the recommendation. And then the recommendation itself, as you're pointing out, currently it's mostly based on tagging. We're working on 2 separate engines that are going to derive recommendations in different ways. We're finding surprising things that, like, if you build a recommendation engine that uses a certain algorithm, it actually works well for certain customers, but less well for other customers. And so what's probably going to end up happening is that we have multiple recommendation engines running simultaneously, serving different groups of customers based on kind of their patterns of behavior. Like players that typically only buy big AAA titles, a recommendation engine that serves them well is actually really different than a recommendation engine that serves somebody that plays a lot of niche, interesting, artsy games.
So we need a recommendation engine.
That's right.
Yes.
Yes.
Now we're getting places. Do we have another question? All right, hang on.
Thank you. Hi. So you just touched on this a little bit, and this is drafting off of Gabe's question a little bit too, but It seems like AAA games and indie games have very different ways of reaching success, and maybe the data for those two groups of games shouldn't be grouped together, or we as developers should be able to separate those out, right? Because AAA titles, you know, they have millions of dollars of marketing budget, and even the very successful indie games out there tend to find other ways to success than like bus stop buyouts or whatever, you know, the AAA developers do. Have you considered giving any way to more granularly access that data for developers?
We've thought about this, and we've had these conversations internally that there's actually, it's really hard to understand a clear distinction between an indie title and a AAA title, because there's a ton of gray area in between, because there's not just like one-man indie teams and big AAA teams. There's the 20-person indie studio. There's the like 50-person publisher that publishes other games. There's even 200-person indie studios. And the scale of product produced by any one of those teams can vary wildly depending on that team, the goals for that team, the level of investment. It's really hard for us to be able to like put games in a bucket and say, well, you're an indie game and you're not an indie game because you have 51 people instead of 50 people. So we're less confident that we can actually slice the data in a meaningful way. There might be some clues that we can look at, like percentage of traffic driven from external sources. If the underlying assumption is that AAA publishers can spend a lot of marketing money and that drives a bunch of their traffic, there might be some interesting correlations there. We haven't looked super closely at whether there are actually correlations or whether it's the hard part about any kind of data analytics across a whole catalog like this is there's so many outliers that the exceptions start to look like the rule, and then it's hard to draw actually conclusions. So we're looking at all of this stuff and trying to understand, like, are there actually correlations? Are there commonalities that are useful for actually decision making? And a lot of it ends up being, well, there's actually so many variables that it's hard to come up with correlations or commonalities that are useful in that way.
I can see how this could cause like an enormous number of people to rabbit hole on it for like a very long time. It's like such a crazy problem. Like people could self-report their own bullet points about the things they think are cool about the game, and then there's like more data points. Like, yeah, that thing's gonna take over the world. Okay, are there more questions down here? Okay, hang on.
Hi, thanks very much. It's super insightful. I have a question about the aesthetics of Steam. For me, I make quite like soft, gentle games, and I feel like it wouldn't necessarily be the right place for me to create a community around those games because there's quite like a bit of like a masculine gunmetal aesthetic. And I was just wondering if there's any thoughts internally about that, and yeah.
Yes, there is thought about that internally. We have to walk the delicate line of not alienating an existing huge customer base whenever we make any changes to Steam. This is a problem once you get large enough, then anything you change pisses off some group of customers. So we do have to proceed delicately in whatever direction we head in. We do want to make it feel like an accessible, welcoming platform, regardless of the content. But I think it's going to take a while to actually get to the point where Steam looks like family-friendly, gentle products, or whatever your particular product may be, without alienating a bunch of users that are comfortable with it looking a certain way or feeling a certain way. So it is a thing that we're thinking about, but we don't have immediate plans to make the whole thing pink and fluffy. I know that's one extreme, but
And what about the customizational approach? I can definitely understand why you'd want to curate the aesthetic, and I do think the aesthetic works very well for the marketplace that it's in. But would you not consider maybe allowing more customization in the colors or aesthetic of your store page?
yeah, there's probably more that we can do there without going full on MySpace or GeoCities. Yeah, so so yeah, well, I think it's within the realm of possibility that we do more customization. And for example, if you set up a developer homepage, you have a little bit more control. You can change the big image at the top of the page, and we'll probably be heading more in that direction as we update store pages. The library, I think, is the next page that we're actively working on designing, and more of that branding is going to be under your control as a game developer.
Next question.
Let's go downstairs and
we go.
drink.
Oh, you want to do it? Cancel
I mean,
it?
eat.
Yeah, eat it, JW. All right, hang on. One more quick one.
It seemed like a tentative
All right,
question.
actual last question.
So recently it's been getting a bit harder to kind of survive as an indie business. There's a lot of games getting out. People are seeing less and less. Like games are becoming more of a hobby for a lot of people because it's just harder to make a living. And then also there's things like Unreal Engine, who recently lowered the cut they're taking from developers on the market. So I wonder if there are any similar thoughts along that line, or like talks within Valve about things like that.
I mean, we talk about all this stuff all of the time. We totally understand. Like it is a huge industry. There's so many people making games now that weren't making games 5 years ago. So there's definitely just a lot more content being created, and quite a bit of it is actually good and interesting. And so there is a lot of competition for attention from customers. We spend a lot of time thinking about how do we help make sure that your games are getting in front of the customers that are going to be most interested in those games, and how do we make sure that we're providing a platform that has the features and the benefits that you want as a developer, that help connect you with customers regardless of what currency or payment method or language that they speak, that are able to get your bits quickly to them after they've paid with whatever payment method. And then for customers, making sure that it's a platform that they want to have their games on, that it's fun to play games because they can communicate with their friends and chat and hang out and do all those kinds of things. So we look at it from a platform service level, and how can we make sure that Steam is the best place to both sell your games as a developer and play games as a customer. But yeah, we understand it's an evolving marketplace, and the industry has changed quite a bit, and we want to make sure that we continue to provide the best value that we can for game developers and customers. It's a thing we talk about a lot internally and spend a lot of time thinking about.
Actually, I secretly have one last question. Is there any talk inside? I think a lot of these things are like amazing features that like, our organization that we run now is like 10 or 12 people, and we have like staff. We can be like, hey, we need can we get like 42 images in different aspect ratios that are customized for this holiday event, and then we're going to use that to push our presence online in the store. But I know when I was like a solo developer or fundamentally a solo content creator, it was like, well, that's never going to happen in like a billion years. So curious about in the future, things like being able to, sort of like work with your community to generate storefront descriptions, for example, or work with the community to, generate temporary content for the storefront, stuff like that. Like, is there a way, is anybody interested in like seeing that going forward as a way to maybe, especially for small devs, kind of like ease some of the burden of generating all the content that would give them access to these like amazing global features?
So we do talk about that a lot. And one thing, because I'm saying something that we haven't said out loud. So there's I know. This is really minor, but this is an example of what you're talking about. We are working to remove the requirement for a video for your store page to go up. Like, just as an example, if you wanted to start getting wish lists for your game, having to have a trailer that represents it is an extremely like large expense for a small team and sucks a lot. So we don't want that anymore. It made a lot of sense when we were selling mostly bigger games or indie games had longer dev. Anyway, I don't want to get into it, but it doesn't make sense now. So yes, I don't know exactly about like getting FanLoc onto your store. I don't know when we're ready to roll something like that up, but I like to hear about it and I want to talk about it more. So
cool.
So in stuff like what we just described, changes like that really just comes from, I think you were just basically emailing a bunch of saying like, hey, well, I've heard a couple of times from people who are asking if it's possible. Just to give you an insight of how this sort of stuff happens, it's like, literally it's like we hear from folks like you. We don't even need that many people saying the same thing to really go like, hey, like, is this something we should actually do? Because a couple of people have mentioned it and it makes sense what they're saying, that why is there a requirement? And then an email goes around to folks, and then we'll just check everyone's sort of gut feel, like, is this right? And we're like, is there any sort of thing that we can see? I mean, like, can we catch any sort of like pitfalls that we didn't consider? But other than that, like, then we'll just work on it and actually change things. Like, there's no one to approve it other than just, hey, all the folks who's gonna press the button will just be like, that sounds great. So yeah, please tell us stuff like this, because it's like, it's stuff that is very obvious to folks. It's just honestly sometimes not obvious to us, even if we've shipped games and, you know, but we made a trailer super early because that's just how we did things. So we never ran into that, for example.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And don't take my thing as a vote for that, because I have employees that do that stuff now. So that doesn't count. Thank you guys so much. Let's go downstairs and drink beer or whatever. Sparkling water. Don't drink the tap water. Like, seriously, don't. You'll die. So yeah, that's it for, I think that's the end of today's theater content also. So quick shout out to all of our amazing sponsors for this year. This is by far the most sort of community support that we've had for putting on this ludicrous event, of which this is only day one somehow. Unreal Engine, Devolver Digital, Juegos Rancheros, our own local 501c3 arts and interactive community. Ugly Machine, of course, NVIDIA, Annapurna, 22nd Century Toys, Panic Button, Farcade, Finji, Alchemy Labs, Red Hook, Toyjoy, Alamo Drafthouse, Mondo. All of these people are the people that are making this possible. So if you see them, tell them thank you. Give them, or do a little round of applause right now. Little round. Okay, good. Thank you. And yeah, now.